A North American nation is now eyeing membership in the European Union.
But what more can we be doing to help Canadian businesses enter into any of the 27 member states that's here in the European Union?
Sounds impossible? Well, 44% of Canadians support the idea. And if that ever happens, who stands to lose the most? In early 2025, 44% of Canadians said they support the idea of joining the European Union, according to a survey by Abacus Data. But what could make one of America's closest allies start thinking about walking away? It all began with escalating trade tensions between the Trump administration and Ottawa. Trump raised aluminum and steel tariffs from Canada to 50%, imposed a 25% tax on electricity from Ontario, and made a controversial statement: Canada should become the 51st state of the United States.
Nobody knows that. Nobody talks about that. And remember, with Canada, we don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything from Canada, and yet it costs us $200 billion a year in subsidy to keep Canada afloat. So when I say they should be a state, I mean that. I really mean that, because we can't be expected to carry a country that is right next to us on our border. It would be a great state. It would be a cherished state.
Canada didn't answer with words. It responded with strategy. The government began deepening ties with the European Union across trade, defense, and diplomacy. Meanwhile, social media was heating up. Canada, leave America, join Europe. In theory, Article 49 of the Treaty on European Union states only European countries can apply for EU membership, and clearly, Canada isn't in Europe. But here's the twist. The term European country has no clear legal definition in EU treaties. Cyprus, although geographically in Western Asia, was accepted due to its historical, cultural, and political ties to Europe. Turkey, despite controversy, remains an official candidate thanks to long-standing geopolitical links. So, what about Canada? Many experts point out it has public health care, similar to most EU nations. It's bilingual in English and French. It's a long-time NATO ally, and it maintains a strong democracy with a developed market economy. Canada already meets 2 of the 3 Copenhagen criteria: democracy and a functioning market economy. The third, adopting EU laws in full, would be the biggest challenge. To join the EU, Canada would likely need to overhaul its legal and regulatory systems, adapt agricultural standards and trade tax structures, transition from the Canadian dollar to the euro, allow freedom of movement for EU citizens, and possibly reduce the power of its Supreme Court in some areas. If full EU membership proves too far-fetched, legally or politically, Canada still has options to move closer to Europe without becoming a formal member. The Norway model, not an EU member, but has full access to the EU's single market, follows most EU laws, has no voting rights in EU decision-making. The Switzerland model, built on hundreds of bilateral agreements with the EU, offers more flexibility but requires years of negotiation and is prone to deadlock and delays. The UK's post-Brexit model, no longer an EU member, but maintains trade and defense cooperation through the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, TCA Canada, meanwhile, already has the CETA agreement with the EU, which eliminates over 90% of tariffs. But Prime Minister Mark Carney wants to go further. Canada is ready to elevate its relationship with the EU to a level never seen before in our history. If Canada chooses to align more closely with Europe than with the US, the consequences won't just be economic. They'll strike at the very heart of America's symbolic and strategic influence. On the economic front, the US could face new EU-aligned trade barriers if Canada harmonizes its standards. American companies could lose preferential access to the Canadian market. On defense, US influence in the Arctic region could weaken. Canada may deepen its role in European security and defense structures. United States on image and symbolism. It could be seen as a deep fracture in the Western alliance. A country once called America's twin is now turning toward Brussels. Don't look away. There's so much more waiting for you in the next chapter. Mexico is surprising America. Claudia Sheinbaum has declared war on Trump and sent a powerful message: we will not bow down. A statement as strong as this, is it enough to make Trump change his mind? Mexico is not only opposing US policies that protect its own interests, but also taking strong reactive measures, putting Trump in a difficult position. While Trump threatens to impose new tariffs, Mexico has started implementing its own retaliatory strategies, such as Mexico supplies parts to major car manufacturers in Detroit. If Mexico decides to increase tariffs on auto parts, the U.S. automotive industry will face higher costs. In 2022, the U.S. imported over $60 billion worth of parts from Mexico. This could cause car prices to skyrocket and directly impact American consumers. Mexico is a major supplier of agricultural products and oil to the U.S. If Mexico restricts exports of agriculture products and oil, food prices could increase sharply, directly affecting the lives of American citizens. Supermarkets in the U.S. heavily rely on fruits, vegetables, and meat from Mexico, and any disruption in this supply chain will raise prices nationwide. Mexico has even warned about the possibility of a temporary border shutdown, which could paralyze the entire U.S. supply chain. A country sharing a border with the U.S. could use it as a strategic weapon, forcing the U.S. economy to face severe consequences.
Que tenga la certeza el pueblo de México que siempre vamos a defender nuestra soberanía y nuestra independencia. Es importante siempre tener la cabeza fría.
But the situation becomes even more serious when Sheinbaum declares that Mexico will not act as a humanitarian checkpoint for the U.S. Mexico refuses to block the flow of migrants simply because the U.S. demands it. They say, "We will not stop migrants just because the U.S. asks us to do so." This means that if the flow of migrants continues to flood the Mexico-U.S. border, Trump will face a huge humanitarian crisis. And this doesn't just happen at any time, but right in the middle of the 2025 election season. The flow of migrants, if not controlled, could create an extremely tense political crisis for the Trump administration.
The Trump administration is reportedly considering a military-controlled buffer zone along the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, this could put active duty troops in direct contact with illegal migrants, raising major legal questions. But will this be considered legal, and what will it mean for immigration enforcement?
And in an election year, this will be an extremely sensitive issue. Notable statistics. Every year, Mexico is responsible for registering and screening millions of migrants, particularly from Central American countries like Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. If Mexico stops cooperating, the number of migrants entering the U.S. could exceed 100,000 people per month, leading to an unprecedented migration crisis in history. Not only stopping at economic retaliatory measures, Mexico is now igniting a movement against U.S. hegemony. Sheinbaum boldly declares, "We will live in freedom and dignity on our own land, not at the command of Washington."
Y tenemos plan A, plan B, plan C para lo que decida el gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Ahora es muy importante que sepa el pueblo de México que siempre vamos a defender la dignidad de nuestro pueblo, que siempre vamos a defender el respeto a nuestra soberanía y un diálogo como iguales.
Not at the command of Washington. This message not only shocked Washington, but also received strong support from other Latin American countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and Brazil. This marks a new wave against U.S. hegemony in the region. If Mexico continues on this path, it won't be just Mexico standing up to the U.S., but an alliance of Latin American nations could form a united front against U.S. intervention in the region. Can Mexico really withstand the pressure from Trump, or will the U.S. respond with even stronger measures? Stay tuned to analyze these tense developments. Controversy surrounding Republican budget cuts and town halls. Recently, Republican town hall meetings have become hotspots for intense criticism and public outrage. In response, the party has made a controversial decision to halt public town halls. But why did they take this step? Is this a strategy to avoid voter confrontation or a necessary move given the current situation? Why have town halls become so chaotic? Town halls, once meant to foster open dialogue, have now turned into highly charged confrontations. Across several states, voters have raised strong concerns about new policies. Why are you cutting healthcare benefits? Teachers, nurses, and veterans are being affected. Who will take responsibility? Why doesn't the government find alternative solutions instead of reducing public benefits? Many lawmakers have struggled to provide satisfactory answers. Some town halls ended prematurely, while others continued in a highly tense atmosphere. As a result, the National Republican Congressional Committee, NRCC, has advised suspending public town halls to prevent further disruptions. But is this a reasonable solution or simply an attempt to avoid accountability? The budget issue. How do Republicans justify their decisions? From the Republican perspective, they argue that budget cuts are not arbitrary but necessary. According to them, the national debt is rising sharply, and without corrective measures, the economy could face serious risks in the future. Some lawmakers explain, "We cannot continue overspending without a clear plan to balance the budget." Cutting benefits is tough, but if we don't act now, future generations will bear a heavier burden. The government needs to scale back and prioritize essential programs to ensure long-term financial stability. However, critics argue that these policies are directly harming working-class citizens, teachers, nurses, and veterans. So, how can policymakers balance financial stability while ensuring public welfare? J.D. Vance faces backlash during vacation, a sign of growing public dissatisfaction. The backlash isn't limited to town halls. Even Vice President J.D. Vance has found himself at the center of public outrage. During a vacation at a Vermont ski resort, he was met with angry protests from constituents. Some of the signs read, "The government is cutting funds, and you're off skiing." The situation escalated to the point where J.D. Vance had to leave discreetly, reflecting the growing frustration among the public. However, the government insists that these budget cuts are necessary to ensure the country's long-term financial health rather than short-term relief. The debate. Are citizens overreacting? Some Republican lawmakers argue that certain groups of citizens are overreacting to these policy changes. Donald Trump has suggested that many of the protests at town halls seem coordinated, implying that not all participants represent the broader electorate. Representative Lisa McClain also questions the intensity of the public response. Budget adjustments may be challenging initially, but in the long run, they will help stabilize the economy. We cannot continue spending without considering long-term consequences. Some people may not see the immediate benefits, but we need to take a broader perspective. However, critics argue that these policies are creating immediate hardships for the working class, and that lawmakers should listen to their constituents rather than limiting public discussions. So the question remains, are these protests fully justified, or are other factors influencing public perception? Political impact. How will this affect the next election? Beyond the economic impact, these decisions could shape the next election. For Republicans, budget cuts appeal to fiscal conservatives, emphasizing a responsible government ensures long-term stability. Short-term sacrifices are necessary. For Democrats and working-class voters, these cuts raise concerns. Essential services are being slashed. Middle and lower-income families will suffer the most. Trump just slapped a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, effective tomorrow. The markets panicked, sending Wall Street and the entire crypto market into free fall. And in a jaw-dropping moment, Trump mocked struggling American farmers, telling them to cheer up. Within hours of Trump's bombshell announcement, hundreds of billions vanished from the markets. Wall Street saw its worst trading day in months as uncertainty and fear took over. Dow Jones plunged negative 1.48%, S&P 500 tumbled negative 1.76%, NASDAQ collapsed negative 2.64%, Bitcoin nosedived negative 8%. But this isn't just a knee-jerk reaction. This is a full-blown panic. Trump's unexpected tariffs threw the markets into chaos, sending investors scrambling. The crypto market collapsed instantly, with Bitcoin plunging over 8% and altcoins following even deeper into the red. Why? Because Trump's economic moves have become wildly unpredictable, and traders fear this is just the beginning of something much worse. This latest move undermines confidence in the U.S. economy, fueling concerns about higher inflation, slower growth, and even a possible recession. Trump's America First trade war will cost American consumers and businesses. Prices will rise. Fast imported cars, smartphones, appliances, groceries, all will get more expensive. Tariffs equal hidden tax on everyday Americans, not just foreign companies. American farmers will suffer Canada and Mexico by billions in U.S. agricultural exports. If they retaliate, which they will, American farmers could lose major markets overnight. Big business is in trouble. Automakers, tech firms, and retailers that rely on Canada-Mexico imports will be forced to raise prices or cut costs. Layoffs and job losses are on the horizon if profit margins shrink. Unemployment may rise. As companies face higher costs, they may cut staff or slow hiring. Factories and manufacturing jobs will be hit hardest. And while Americans struggle with rising prices, Trump's response? Cheer up. Both Canada and Mexico immediately retaliated, warning of severe countermeasures against U.S. goods. Canada will hit back hard. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau vowed revenge, slapping a 25% tariff on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods. This includes major U.S. exports, automobiles, agricultural products, and consumer goods. Mexico isn't backing down either. Mexico's trade minister warned of mirror tariffs, potentially blocking billions in U.S. exports. Mexico is also in talks with China and Europe to replace American suppliers. The reality? This could destroy American businesses that rely on exports to Canada and Mexico. If a full-blown trade war erupts, U.S. companies could lose billions in sales. Jobs will be cut, and economic growth could slow dramatically. And let's be clear, Canada and Mexico don't need the U.S. as much as they used to. If they shift to China and the EU, America could lose its dominance in North America's trade economy. Trump claims this will make America stronger, but leading economists warn this could backfire in a big way. Investors may flee the U.S. global funds hate instability. If Trump's policies keep shaking markets, capital will flow elsewhere. Supply chains could break. U.S. industries heavily rely on Canadian and Mexican materials. Tariffs make everything more expensive and disrupt manufacturing. Inflation could explode. Tariffs equal higher prices for American consumers. If inflation rises too fast, it could trigger an economic slowdown. Recession fears are rising. If businesses struggle, jobs disappear, and inflation stays high, America is headed toward an economic downturn. America could lose trade dominance. If Canada and Mexico diversify their trade ties, the U.S. may lose its grip on North American trade leadership. Trump is betting big on economic nationalism. But if he's wrong, everyday Americans will be the ones paying the price. Once a powerful symbol of the MAGA movement, Donald Trump and his allies are now facing a wave of backlash across the United States, and even in Canada. From Texas, a Republican stronghold, to Toronto, where a crowd erupted in boos during the U.S. national anthem. The anger is growing. Have people turned their backs on Trump, or is this just a temporary reaction? In Texas, where Trump previously won by a landslide, something unusual happened. At a town hall meeting for Congressman Keith Self, a loyal MAGA member, the crowd erupted in boos and furious protests. As a Republican representative in Texas' 3rd Congressional District, where Trump holds a plus 30-point advantage over Democrats, Keith Self was expected to receive strong support. Instead, he was attacked by his own voters at the event. The crowd chanted, "Do your job, do your job," expressing their deep frustration with MAGA policies. This raises a crucial question. If even Trump's most loyal supporters are turning against him, can he maintain his political stronghold? It's not just Americans. Canadians are furious too. At a WWE event in Toronto, as the U.S. national anthem played, the crowd erupted. Why? Because of Trump's aggressive policies against Canada, threatening to annex Canada, a shocking and unacceptable idea, imposing steep tariffs on Canadian goods, severely damaging the country's economy. Canadians have started boycotting American products and limiting travel to the U.S. as a way to protest Trump's administration. This marks a serious breakdown in U.S.-Canada relations, once considered one of the strongest alliances in the world. If Trump continues down this path, not only Canada, but the entire world may turn against him. While protests against Trump grow louder, America is facing an economic and social crisis. But what is Trump doing? Not holding emergency meetings, not implementing solutions. Instead, he's playing golf. Images of Trump relaxing on the golf course while America's struggles have sparked widespread public outrage. Living costs are skyrocketing. Inflation continues to burden the middle class and working Americans. Protests against budget cuts are erupting across the country. Yet Trump remains detached from reality, as if nothing is happening. Is this how a leader should act during a national crisis? While everyday Americans struggle, Trump's new budget plan delivers massive tax cuts to the wealthy while slashing essential services for the most vulnerable. Medicaid cuts. Trump slashes $880 billion from Medicaid, leaving millions without medical care. Hospitals in rural areas may shut down. Prescription drug prices will soar. Elderly, disabled, and low-income families suffer the most. Education crisis. A $400 billion cut to public schools and student aid means fewer teachers, larger class sizes, higher tuition, making college unaffordable. Special education and low-income schools lose critical funding. Farmers struggle. Food prices rise. With $300 billion in cuts to farm assistance, small farms face bankruptcy, food shortages and higher grocery prices. Big corporations take over agriculture. Billionaires get richer. While Americans suffer, Trump's plan delivers trillions in tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy. The top 1% saves billions. Corporations get richer while worker wages stay low. Fewer regulations mean more corporate greed and pollution. Who really wins? Not workers, students, farmers, or seniors, but the wealthy elite. Trump sells this budget as economic reform, but in reality, it's a direct attack on the middle and working class. How much longer will Americans keep paying the price?